Nikki, thank you for coming on the Gem State Housing Alliance's podcast to talk about your experiences in the housing arena. You have been doing this kind of work for your entire career. And I've been learning a lot from you because, like we've talked about, my background is more in direct service, working with people who are homeless or being evicted, more on the people side and seeing the effects of not having enough housing. But you have been working in this arena for a long time. So more in how housing gets built and what types of housing, needs to get built. You're very involved in that. So I've been learning a lot from you, and I'm eager to hear what you can share with folks who are listening. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into this very niche career field, affecting one of probably the biggest issues or the biggest issue that our society is dealing with right now. How did you get into housing, and kind of what have you done with your career path so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited about Gem State Housing Alliance as a new organization, and I know it's going to do such important work in our community. So thank you, first of all, for taking that on. It's a big project, and it's going to be really impactful. So yeah, the work that I do in housing and housing affordability really came from I think the experience of moving from Boise, where I grew up, to Philadelphia for college. And when I moved to Philly, I sort of, for the first time in my life, understood viscerally what it meant for people to not have enough. And realizing that there were many people in the city who were struggling with maintaining housing at all, or if they had housing, being able to continue to afford it. And that really inspired me to go into direct service work. So similar to you, I have a direct service background. Right out of college, I went and worked for an organization that provided homeless services and also provided permanent housing. And what I really got to see as a result was, in the mornings, I was working at a drop-in center for people who were chronically homeless. I was, serving coffee, getting people clothes out of the clothing closet, and working with folks who had been unsheltered for most of them for a long time. And then in the evenings, I worked in a supportive housing. It was a beautiful old Philly row home where there were 16 formerly homeless women who lived there and had been stably housed, most of them for decades, but had, significant mental health challenges that meant that they needed ongoing support in order to be able to maintain their housing stability and to have, a healthy, good life. And so I really went back and forth on a daily basis of seeing with my own eyes the difference that housing and housing stability makes in a person's life. I was seeing the people who had managed to find stable housing after that experience of homelessness and the people who hadn't. And it really was life-changing in terms of the way that the work that I wanted to do and the way that I looked at that work. And so I went and got my master's in social work, mostly because I wanted to be able to move into this policy space while also really continuing to be connected to what I see as the heart of the work, which is, like you said, the people. So went and got a social work degree with a focus in policy and administration, and then worked for a group in the Seattle, King County area called the Housing Development Consortium of Seattle-King County. And was able to just learn so much there about what it takes for cities and municipal governments to try to do everything in their toolbox to address housing affordability, and what it takes for a diverse housing ecosystem that sometimes has different priorities and different strategies that it wants to advance, what it looks like to see that kind of diversity of perspective as healthy, as good, and as something that leads to better outcomes in terms of what a policy solution can look like. So super fortunate to work with and learn from really wonderful and smart folks in the affordable housing ecosystem there. Then I went and worked for the city of Seattle in their Office for Civil Rights as a civil rights analyst. And it was interesting because a lot of the work that I had done, or some of the work I had done at the Housing Development Consortium, was really focused on passing new policies. What does it look like to get a city or to get the state to make a new law that does something to address some kind of problem in our community? Whereas the Office for Civil Rights was really about implementation of some of those same policies that I had worked on. And so seeing the other side of it and going, okay, so much of this work that needs to be done is actually about how we implement policy, not just about the creation of it in the first place. There's an old saying that the creation of a new policy or passing a new law is like the wedding, and the implementation is like the marriage. And so getting into the slog of the implementation and of the marriage, but also getting to see what success really looks like and to see the real life impacts on people's lives. Yeah. And then when a role in the mayor's office here at the city of Boise came available back in 2021, I applied and was just beyond thrilled about the chance to come home and to do this work back in Boise. And I've been here ever since.
Yeah. You know how it is coming back from Boise to Boise from another city too. So, and I had that experience as well. We're both boomerangs, having worked in other cities. So I guess I'm curious to hear from you on kind of some of the differences. And, when I tell people I worked in homelessness in San Francisco, they're like, oh, wow, like that's bad. Seattle obviously has a ton of housing challenges and, thousands of people were homeless. Their housing costs are through the roof. No pun intended. But I guess what did you learn in Seattle in terms of things that you think they're doing right and things that maybe they're doing not? What's going wrong there as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that there is a lot going right. There is a really significant public commitment to addressing housing affordability. Seattle has the oldest housing levy in the country. They passed it first, I think, in 1987 and have renewed it every 7-ish years since. So really significant investment, and they have many, 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 many more affordable homes than the city of Boise does as a result of that investment and that willingness to push. I think a lot of parallels that I saw in coming home in 2021, right, is that in Seattle, the affordability challenges there's a much longer history of them there than here, right? But in the time that I lived there, which was from 2011 to 2021, they significantly worsened. And a big part of that had to do with an influx of folks who moved to the area, who had incomes that were not connected to the housing market, right? And there was this incredible pressure that was added to the market. And we saw many of the things, coming home to Boise in 2021, I was like, oh my gosh, like I know where this goes because I watched this happen for 10 years in Seattle, and where it goes is nowhere good. And so that's a big part of why we're so focused on trying to do everything we can now to try to not end up where Seattle has ended up. I think one of the things, and I know this is something that folks in our community are really invested in, as is the city of Boise, is around zoning. That's been interesting. Seattle has more single-family zoning, sort of proportional to the rest of the city than I think almost any other large American city. And the efforts to change that have been fraught with challenges and conflict. So that's certainly one area that the city is continuing to work. But yeah, there's just another level of need as well, just in terms of the sheer population there that is very different than a Boise.
Right. I know San Francisco has that challenge too with zoning and some unique challenges as well with geographical constraints.
Absolutely.
And they're literally constrained basically on an island, right? 7 by 7 miles. And they also have a ton of historic homes, those row homes that have to be preserved. Does Seattle have those similar challenges too?
Absolutely. Yeah. You've got the Puget Sound on one side, and you've got certainly, geography on that constrains it, and the historic nature of some of those homes as well. And I think also just a really entrenched and powerful group of folks who do not want to see their neighborhoods change, understandably, because they live in very beautiful neighborhoods. So that, the political power dynamic there is real as well.
Prevents housing from getting built, and different kinds of housing and sizes to meet the growing needs of the population.
Absolutely.
So I want you to talk a lot about affordability, capital A affordable, right?
Sure.
Which is the more technical term, and then lowercase affordable. I think what you're saying is Seattle in particular maybe has created a lot of the capital A affordable, but on the other side of things, their supply constraints, and so they can't really create a lot of you're not seeing a lot of this lowercase affordable because the market is just not creating that. So tell me about that dynamic.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very large question. I guess we can start there and then I'll ask you a more specific question.
Good. That sounds good. I'll take a swing at it and then you can direct us where we need to go.
Okay.
I think working at the Housing Development Consortium, our focus was really on what you called capital A affordable housing. And so that is housing that is going to be where rents or housing costs are going to be held at a certain level with some, increases over time as inflation goes up, that kind of thing. But essentially housing that's protected from the big swings that you see in market rate housing. And where housing that's going to be prioritized for people who have lower incomes, lower than the area median, right? And so that type of housing was really our focus. And that's the Seattle Housing Levy as an example. That's the type of housing that it invests in because it's focused on, look, for folks who are making lower incomes, the market is not going to deliver housing that's truly affordable to them in the numbers that are needed. And so we're going to invest in the development, the creation of those types of homes because people with lower incomes, they are an important part of the fabric of our community. We don't want to be essentially our whole city to be like a gated community without the gate. We want to be a diverse and vibrant city, and that requires people all across the income spectrum to be able to live here. So that's where the focus was. And I remember the moment I was sitting at my desk. We were in the middle of a renewal campaign for the Seattle Housing Levy. I'm looking at the numbers in terms of the level of need in our community for affordable homes and what we're investing in. And I just had this realization that the vast majority of people who need a place that they can afford to live, a below market home, the vast majority of them are actually never going to live in subsidized affordable housing. The majority of them are going to find those homes on the private market, and they're going to find them by finding places that are in an inconvenient location, have perhaps a little bit of an eccentric landlord, are older, are have something that is kind of funky about them or unique. Or they are going to find it by making their household size bigger, by getting a roommate, right? And so these are the choices that people make in order to figure out how to afford what's available on the market. And so there really is a need to look at both sides of this because the truth is we do not have at the federal level, we don't have the level of investment that would be needed for everyone who has an income below the median income to live in a subsidized rent-restricted apartment. That's just not real. And so we have to also pay attention to this other side of the equation, which is how do we allow the market to respond to the needs for more supply, and how do we ensure that as it does so, we find ways to include additional affordable homes in what's being brought online. Because what's typically brought online, as you know, it's more expensive housing, right? New construction is expensive. And so the new inventory that gets brought online is going to, just as a result of the expenses involved in constructing it, is going to be more expensive. And so how do we address that disconnect between the inventory that's coming online and what our residents can actually afford? How do we kind of bridge that gap? So that's...
Do it all. There's no silver bullet. We can't only have capital A. We can't only have lowercase a. Your perspective is we need it all.
Absolutely.
I want you to address this question because we have obviously a more conservative state in Idaho. Folks are more free market capitalists, and they're like, let's let the market decide. We do have a lot of Republican YIMBYs in Idaho, or just, other people who maybe aren't, are on the other side of the aisle or unaffiliated. I've seen YIMBYs all over the aisle, all sides of the aisle say, Supply. We just need more supply. We need to focus on, like you said, zoning. We need to focus on, NIMBYism, trying to combat that. We need to focus on trying to finance, help developers finance some of these buildings, developments. But they would say if you create too many constraints around capital A affordable and, have inclusionary zoning and say these buildings have to meet X, Y, or Z criteria, that the projects won't pencil, or developers will just say, you know what, I'd rather go make money on this other type of development, so I'm just not going to build that. And there's this whole debate going on all across the country about this.
Yep.
So yeah, what's your take on that debate?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts in case folks aren't familiar with the term inclusionary housing or inclusionary zoning. It comes in two flavors. So a city not in the state of Idaho. One of the flavors is illegal, so we won't spend much time on it. So in Idaho, it's not legal for cities to use what's called mandatory inclusionary zoning, which is where a city would say, if you want to build over 4 stories or whatever it is, if you want to do this in our community, you must perform. You must perform. This is very jargony.
Yeah.
You must include affordable units. Or in many states, they use what's a pay in lieu model where the developer doesn't actually have to include the units. They can pay for the cost of constructing them elsewhere. So that's something, again, not legal in Idaho, not something that's on the table. Something that cities can do in Idaho is voluntary inclusionary zoning, which just says we can offer this incentive, which is we'll decrease your parking requirement, we'll increase your height or your density. We'll say, and in exchange, if you want to take this option, you can decide, okay, I will do X, Y, and Z in terms of how affordable to make the building. The challenge here really comes down to like the calibration, right? So if, for example, we say, okay, you can build a 4-plex here, but you have to make 100% of the homes that you build affordable at 60% of the area median income. That will absolutely prevent someone from building a 4-plex there, because to rent something at 60% AMI that you've just constructed new without any kind of form of subsidy, you would lose money on every project and you would go bankrupt. So that's not a reasonable thing to ask people to do. So it's all about figuring out what is the calibration where the incentive is actually an incentive and makes the project a little bit more financially feasible, where you're really getting a win-win. You get a more financially feasible project and you get to include some affordable homes in that project. That's really the goal. And I'll be the first to say that the city of Boise's incentives, our first swing at this in the modern zoning code, are not making things financially feasible. And we know that because we, first of all, we hear from the folks in our community who are trying to do this, and they've let us know loud and clear that it's overall not working. And we also brought in some folks who help cities all over the country to adjust their affordability incentives to try to make them to hit that sweet spot we were describing, where something is actually financially feasible and it results in a public good, like more affordable units for our community. And so that's something that our council will be taking a look at, is the possibility of updating those incentives to make them actually responsive to our own community's needs.
Yep. And how would you respond to that argument that people say, though, where we just need to increase supply and this is all going to trickle down, versus the argument I've heard you say where, well, it's never going to trickle down enough, like, I guess.
Absolutely. So the Urban Institute actually just came out with a report on this a couple of days ago.
Cool.
It's called Abundance Plus Affordability or something like that.
Nice.
And it's looking at this question of, is deregulation going to be enough? And what they estimate is that nationwide, there is about, if you look at cost burden households, and this is when we say cost burden, of course, we mean households who are paying more than about 30% of their income in rent. If someone's cost burdened, then they're paying enough in rent that if there's some kind of emergency in the rest of their life, it might put their housing at risk, right? Because so much of their income is dedicated toward just keeping themselves housed. So 30% is considered kind of the cutoff. So the Urban Institute estimates that nationwide, of people who are paying more than 30% of their income in rent, there is about 18% of them who probably could have that cost burden eliminated by just deregulation. And that 18% are folks who are paying basically 30 to 35% of their income in rent. So there are certainly some folks in our community who deregulation probably would be sufficient in order to address their cost burden. They are also the best resourced of the people who are experiencing cost burden, right? And so if that's all we care about is that 18%, then yes, we can say deregulation, let it filter down, the trickle down, piece of this. And 18% isn't nothing. Like that's actually, like, if we can get that done through deregulation, then great, we should. That's 18% of people who are going to be able to then have money to, afford the rest of their lives in a different way than they do now. There's another 51% of the population nationwide, though, that are paying over 50% of their income toward their housing costs. And for those folks, deregulation is going to make their lives easier for sure. Having additional income to manage the other costs in your life is a big deal. But it's not actually going to get them away from being cost burdened. They'll be slightly less cost burdened, but they'll still be cost burdened enough that we'll continue to see those kinds of affordability challenges for that segment of the population. And for those folks, you're really looking at, the kinds of interventions that are needed, something along the lines of rental assistance in some form or fashion. And then the remaining 30% or so are folks who are kind of in the middle, for whom there is going to need to be some kind of additional intervention in addition to deregulation, but who are closer to being in a stage where the intervention doesn't need to be as resource intensive as something like rental assistance would be. So, I think it's nuanced. That might have been a much longer answer than you were looking
and
for.
I'm like, I need to read this report.
I'll
I have
send it to
2
you.
days ago. That sounds like a really great thing to share also on our platform to get folks thinking about this. Because definitely we've got all kinds of folks in Idaho on having different perspectives on this. So I appreciate you sharing your perspective and kind of airing that out. We've had other people that we've talked to that have a different perspective on it, talking about it. And so, I think it is like finding what is that sweet spot, and how do we do both? How do we do all of the things? Because as we know, solving the housing challenges that our state has is not a silver bullet solution.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately. So could you talk a little bit more, also kind of moving on from I won't make you go too much deeper on the affordability debate. But could you talk a little bit more about, you were saying earlier, building housing is very expensive. For folks that don't build housing, which is most of us, why is it so expensive? And how does that impact housing costs?
Absolutely. So when you think about the costs that go into housing construction, there's a handy sort of little, I don't know what the word is. I'm like, it's not an acronym, whatever, turn of phrase. There's a handy thing called the 5 L's, that there are more things in this that impact housing affordability, but it can help you remember. A mnemonic device, I think that's what that's called. Okay, so one is the cost of land. So if you are going to go and build, the fourplex of your dreams, the first thing you're going to have to deal with is, how much did I pay for the land? And if I've already sunk really a lot of money into the land, then I start to have fewer and fewer choices in terms of how much I'm going to have to charge, right, for the end product in order to make back the money that I am spending on it, right? So when land costs are high, then this obviously impacts the cost of housing. Another one is labor. So certainly since the Great Recession, the construction industry all across the country has really struggled in terms of having sufficient labor and having sufficient skilled labor to address our needs. And that's certainly the case here in Boise. We're not helped by the fact that we are geographically isolated in a way that other markets like Seattle and Portland, right? You have skilled trades workers who can easily move between those different markets as, to respond to what's going on or what the labor needs are. In Boise, it's not so easy for a workforce to come in and supplement. If we don't have enough electricians, then where are the electricians going to come from to meet the needs. And I mean, I'll tell you, when I first came home and started this job, I was chatting with somebody in the real estate world about, what the city can do to address housing affordability. And he said, Nikki, the best thing that the city of Boise could do to address housing affordability is send a kid to trade school, because we are really, really hurting in this area. So certainly labor is a big component. And when labor costs go up, and that also absolutely has an impact on then what the end product needs to be sold for in order for there to be a profit for the company that is, building this housing. Another one is the L is lumber, but of course it's not just lumber, it's all of the construction materials, right? And so the cost of those construction materials, we saw COVID definitely had a big impact, and had an impact not just on the cost, but just the availability. Where suddenly, you've got your construction materials are up in Canada, but nobody can get wheels under them to get them down to you. And so the availability of those construction materials and the cost of it is definitely something that can have a big impact. Another one of the L's is loans. So certainly the cost of capital is a huge one. And that's something we've seen in the city of Boise. If you look at the number of permit applications that we receive for new development overall, we were seeing really high numbers, record-breaking numbers of permit applications through kind of the early 2020, 2021, 2022. And then when interest rates rose really significantly, you see the permit applications just take a nosedive. And so much of why that additional development isn't moving forward is attributable to the fact that, interest rates just went up. And now it's going to be much more challenging. The project doesn't pencil anymore because it made sense with a 3% interest rate, but it doesn't make sense with a 7% one, right? So that's another huge factor when it comes to how much housing costs. And another one is laws. And so this comes back to kind of the conversation we're having about zoning and about what are the ways in which zoning processes, whether it's what's allowed at all or just how long the process itself takes. And the all of the regulatory hoops that folks have to jump through, that absolutely does have an impact on the cost of housing, along with the other 4 L's. So that's kind of that's sort of
I've never
one way
heard
to look
it
at
explained
it.
I've never heard about the 5 L's. Those are the 5 things that I talk about, but and NIMBYs too, but
Sure.
that's a great way to remember the challenges. So, we talked a little bit about zoning, and that's a big purpose for the Gem State Housing Alliance to work with cities and to try to improve zoning laws to allow for more different types of housing. Boise's done a lot in that direction and continues to move in that direction. I'm curious to hear though, what policies we can push in the other directions. Well, especially in the loans arena, as well as how is there a place for an organization to tackle labor? Is that something that is possible, or is that just going to be a challenge? Materials. I think I know the low hanging fruit is definitely in the loan category where government can help tackle those challenges. But I'm curious to hear if you, having worked in government, if there are other things that you can actually do to tackle those other things, or if that's just going to be what it is.
Yeah. So one of the big points of conversation on this front in other states, and I think more recently here, has to do with using property tax exemptions as a way to make projects more financially feasible. So that's one policy area that, the city of Boise doesn't have the ability under Idaho state law, and nor does any other city in the state, to provide property tax exemption for affordable housing, except for a very, very narrow and almost never used lane of doing it. And so there's a lot of conversation about, is there some way that we can give this tool to cities as well to make decisions about using property tax exemption as a lever that will help with the financing piece of it. Certainly low-cost loans, like you mentioned, is something that at the state level through Idaho Housing and Finance Association that can make a really significant difference. And in terms of the labor piece, yeah, that's something I'm definitely really interested in. And I think there's a lot of different directions that you can go with that. Like modular housing is a great example, where through new construction technologies, we can build housing more cheaply and faster.
Year round too.
And do it year round. And with and so that's certainly something that we'll be interested to see what the future looks like on that end as well.
What about just lowering costs generally? I mean, you guys have done stuff like land banking. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Absolutely. Yeah. So one thing that the city has done as a strategy is to purchase land with the goal of building affordable housing on it. And then we're able to essentially lease that land back to an affordable housing developer where we are leasing it at, as you might guess, a very low rate. And that's part of, we're able to lower the land cost, right?
That's the first
in
step.
the L's. And that's a way to contribute as well. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's something that, and I have shared with you the American Enterprise Institute paper, and they have done a lot of really great work. We'll put that on our website too, but they actually have kind of a zoning overlay of almost every city in America, which is really cool. And it shows vacant land just in commercial zones. But there is a lot of, especially land that's underutilized in commercial zones across the country that could be, their argument is kind of like commercial is overzoned, especially with more people working from home and just changes in the economy and just needing to update things from the 70s, I think. But they've found, acres and acres of vacant land in commercial zones. And so their argument is, hey, we could create tens of thousands of more units a year if we were able to utilize that land. So one thing I'm interested in is helping cities look at what land they have available to them and doing a feasibility study on what could be done there. Because cities do have, you don't maybe notice it driving around. You're like, everything seems so packed in tight. But if you look really closely, there's quite a few vacant lots here and there. So
absolutely. Yeah, I think the city of Boise right now is actually doing a study to understand what our housing, and I'm going to say the wrong words here, housing capacity is with the new zoning code, to understand with the way the changes that were made to the zoning code, what is the number of units that we could feasibly have here inside the city. And the goal, of course, being to have a dense and walkable community in which we are trying to the extent possible to direct development into areas where infrastructure already is, instead of out into our open space, our farmlands, and our places that frankly are just farther and farther away from our fire service. So trying to really look at what is the capacity under the modern zoning code and what does that mean for what do we need to do in order to better enable that kind of development to happen. Because it absolutely is, there are things that we can continue to do to make it easier for folks to do that type of development and for it to be financially feasible.
What do you say to, another huge thing that we deal with? You said the word dense, and so I immediately was like, oh, no, don't say that.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because
it can be a scary word for people.
Just, in talking to community members and going to P&Z hearings, the word dense is kind of a dirty word. And so how do you respond to that as someone who actually looks at the cost of density versus sprawl? Because in Idaho, some people say, I don't want anything to change. I want to stop growth. My community needs to stop growing and just stay the same. And my neighborhood needs to stay exactly the same for the next 30 years. And my response is, well, that's not realistic. All of our communities are going to grow and change. That's just how society works and has for many years now. So things are going to change. And so how do you want them to change? Do you want to see more maybe smaller homes, infill, different types and sizes of homes in your community? It doesn't necessarily have to be a 70-story apartment complex.
Absolutely.
But it could be like a fourplex, on the other side of the fence of your house in your backyard. Mm-hmm. Do you want that? Or the choice is, do you want your community to sprawl out? Do you want to have more taxes to pay because you have to pay for more infrastructure? Do you want more traffic because people are commuting in to Boise from Middleton, where I grew up? I guess, what's your take on that whole challenge? Because at the city level, I think we do have a lot of people in Boise that are like kind of accepted the reality of that Boise is a bigger city now. It's getting more dense, and it probably will continue to get more dense. But I guess, how do you respond to people that continue to say, like, stop the growth?
Yeah, I guess I have two thoughts from that. And one is, this question of, can we actually preserve the things we love in Amber and never let them change? And then the other has to do with design, actually. So when we think about, I too would love it if, the Boise of my childhood had just been
Right.
had been preserved and was kept there, and I could live in it forever. That would be a thing.
And you just walk downtown, everyone.
I know everyone.
It's great.
Yeah. And I mean, there is, I think, it's very human to want to protect the things that we love and to not want them to change. That's a really normal thing for all of us. And I think that the challenge is in recognizing that that's not actually an option on the table for any of us. That would be nice, but we don't get to choose that in basically any aspect of our life. So the choice actually becomes, do you want change to happen to you in a way that isn't informed by your own values or your own priorities, but it just kind of happens to you? Or do you want to try to have some kind of, to be able to shape it in a way that allows you to keep the things that really, truly matter about the thing or the place that you love, while other parts of it are going to change? And so, coming back to our comments earlier about why we do this work being about the people, for me, it's about the people of Boise. That's the most important thing, is how do we ensure that the people who make up the fabric of our community, the people who've built our community and made it the beautiful place that we all love, how do we make sure that they still get to live here? How do we make sure that and that their kids and grandkids can afford to live here, right? And so there really is a piece here of, how do we, if that's our value, then what is this going to look like for us? Mm-hmm. The other thing I wanted to say, though, is about density as a dirty word. And it absolutely, density done poorly can be pretty terrible. And so something that we talk and think about a lot is how to balance that. When people say they don't like density, what they're often saying is what they experienced was poor design. And there are ways in which to build for more neighbors that feel very different from, I think a straw man argument that gets brought up is like, we don't want Cabrini Green. And like, nobody's trying to build Cabrini Green anymore. Right. And there are a lot of lessons learned about how poor design can have really negative impacts, not only on the folks who are then living in and near buildings with poor design, but on the conversation at large about what it means to have more neighbors in your community. We've seen how poorly that has gone in the past. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about and being really, really mindful of, how do we ensure that the additional homes that are being brought to our community are ones that the neighbors experience as being a positive, add to the neighborhood? That, oh man, I used to just have my one neighbor across the street, and then they built these 4 townhomes, and now I have, there's little kids running around, or there's, somebody else to watch my cat because when I go out of town, because now I've got, the teenagers across the street. So really, trying to be thoughtful about, again, it kind of comes back to that win-win of how can we make sure that we, as we see growth, that growth can be a positive change in our community as well.
I've seen that too. Once, when people initially see a design come in, they're like, see it, it's very intimidating, right?
Absolutely.
But then it actually comes in and they're like, oh, and once the thing is built, like, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And actually, they do see the positive benefits. And there's economic benefits too. That research has shown if you have more homes near your home, it adds to walkability, bikeability. Eventually, you get more amenities near you. Over time, your property value increases, which folks think it decreases, and your property tax burden decreases because you got more people sharing in the overall burden. So there are benefits that folks don't see immediately, obviously, when the thing comes online. And change is really hard. We've been through it, having been from here, oh my gosh, over the last 30 years, plus years, things have really changed in our community, as you know, and it's been hard to watch in some ways, but at the same time, it's just an inevitable path that we're on. And so how do we do it in a way that's really thoughtful and how do we do it in a way that accommodates, our kids who are gonna hopefully be able to live here in 20 years and afford to live here. That's my hope is that young people can stay here near their families if they want to. I don't want my grandkids living in Indiana. I think Governor Cox from Utah said that recently because they've been talking about zoning in Utah too, and it's like, I don't want my son to have to move to Indiana so he can afford to buy a home. So, that's what it's all about, really. But yeah, I love the way you explain that. So I'm going to steal some of your talking points from today when I talk about housing. But thank you, Nicki, for coming on and sharing your perspectives on affordability, how expensive housing is, why it's so expensive, and just what we can do and what governments can do potentially to help the issue. Which I think there are a lot of opportunities here in Idaho. And thank you for all that you've done at City of Boise to keep us on the right path too here in Boise and keep things moving in the right direction there. You guys have done a ton of work in the housing arena.
Oh,
obviously.
well, thanks so much for having me. And looking forward to many more good conversations.
Yeah, me too.